The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle. Welcome to The Marinade, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. Each episode, we welcome musicians, actors, comedians, authors, visual artists, filmmakers, anyone who creates art to talk about how and why we make stuff. This is feature episode 150, y'all, and our guest is Elijah Johnston. Elijah is a singer and songwriter from Athens, Georgia, whose infectious brand of indie pop earned him the Vic Chesnutt Songwriter of the Year award, and deservedly so. His new album, Hometown Vampire, is infused with elements of so many sounds that I love. I fell for this record on the first listen, and I'm so excited for the opportunity to pick his brain about process. Everyone, it is my great honor to bring you my conversation with Elijah Johnston.
Can't commit to anything that will stay. All my friends are running circles, and damn, they sound great the whole time.
Right there. Right there is perfect, dude. Thanks for doing this. I've been devouring your record, Hometown Vampire, and
dude, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. I was having a conversation recently with somebody about kind of what has happened in my life is that I've got this podcast. It was never meant to be white guys with guitars, but
Sure.
I know a lot of white guys with guitars and I love them. And it was never meant to be an Americana podcast. But it kind of like went that direction just because I had access to folks, and that's the stuff I gravitate toward. And so what has happened for me is a lot of like listening to kind of folk influence, sort of, singer-songwritery kind of stuff. And I was just talking to somebody recently as I was doing a Marinade Moments, which is my podcast where I talk about shows I've attended. And I was doing Neutral Milk Hotel.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I saw Neutral Milk Hotel in 2015, and like I saw Jeff Mangum solo a couple years before that. And I was just telling a friend of mine, like, especially in the aughts, like from like 2000 to 2009 or 10, I don't think that you would, if you looked at my record collection or you looked at it later on my streams, later on that decade, I don't think you would say that I was somebody who was like very Americana focused. I listened to a lot of, I was doing my deep dive into the Beach Boys. I was like doing a lot of, I listened to a lot of Wilco, a lot of Radiohead, Spoon was a big band for me then. And I was telling him how like, I kind of missed that because it pushed me, it challenged me. And your record came out right when I was having this conversation, and it snapped me back to that adventurous time when I was listening to all those great records. It's absolutely fucking fantastic, man. And it feels like all those records that I got so excited about at that time.
Yeah, dude, thank you. I appreciate that. That's it's interesting. I feel like I'm always curious people who respond well to my music, who especially like that era of indie rock from like 15 years ago and stuff like that. I'm always curious like what it reminds them of, because I find that it's usually pretty different than what I had in mind, but never in like a negative way. It's just kind of like I wasn't super aware of that at that point in my life, and I had kind of a different frame of reference for that era,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what what it does for me, because I think this speaks
Hmm.
to the power of the record, but also kind of on a broader level, the power of music in general. And that is
Sure.
that your record takes me back to a time in the aughts. I was in my 20s. So I'm
Hmm.
like from 20 to 29 during that time period. And what it takes me back to is just such a time of exploration, not just in music, but just a curiosity that I had. And I think
Hmm.
what I try to still be a curious person. I try to still be a lifelong learner. But I think what happens when you get to my age, like there is, I own my house and I got my partner and my dogs and my career is pretty settled. And
Hmm.
I think that there can be a feeling of kind of like, and this isn't bad, I'm just settled, right? Like I'm just very
Yeah.
happy with my life. But what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to not be curious. And I think what
Yeah.
these songs do is that they make me curious again. Like it
Yeah.
sparked a curiosity in me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, totally. And I'm glad to hear that. I definitely feel like the making of the album was a very like, why not, we're curious type of experience and environment, like recording wise. So I'm glad that it comes across that way, and then it creates that.
All right, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the
Mhm.
process. Let's start with sort of the writing of the songs. What is your process like in general? What are you, a sit down, do the work everyday person? Does it come when it comes?
I wish I could tell you that I was a little more consistent about it. I mean, I don't know. I watched this documentary recently about like old school Nashville songwriters, and they're talking about, we keep office hours and stuff like that. And I appreciate that, and I've had times where I've tried to do that kind of thing, but generally speaking, I'm like I'll sit down and play the guitar when I feel like I need to, and the song usually happens all at once. It usually happens pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But it's not as much of a, I'm going to sit down. I mean, I've written plenty of songs that I've just not done anything with because I was like, oh, this isn't very good. But it's an
Hmm.
exercise. But I'm not as consistent as other people are. It's not a everyday type of thing for me, I don't think.
Okay, so when you're sitting down, you sit down, you've got your guitar, you're playing a little bit, and you say it all comes. Is that like a line comes to you? Let's get a little more granular on it. Like,
Yeah,
how does that work?
I think it's typically a phrase will come together. It's usually like phrase and melody at the same time is kind of like, it usually takes like one phrase, and then I can kind of like peel it back after that, but I have to have like an entry point. And it's almost like I get, the best way I know how to describe it is, it's like if you were looking for like a trap door, and you were like you had your hands up against the wall, and you're trying to like feel for like a divot where you can press your hand through, and like all of a sudden there's going to be a trap door, and it's like all of a sudden I find like the one phrase where it's like, oh, I can press on that, and that's going to make it work. And because I think that like I said, I've written plenty of songs that I don't love or I never do anything with, and usually those are things where I'm like, oh, this makes sense, and this all rhymes, and this has a structure, and it checks the box of like song.
Mhm.
But it's usually when it's something that I'm inspired by or something that I want to record, it's usually something that where it's like it kind of spills out. And like, I don't know, like a lot of the songs on this record started as like one line or like one or two phrases of like, okay, I have this melody, I feel really strongly about that, and I've got a couple lines that feel really good, and I have to kind of just sit here until every other piece of it feels the same quality.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard it put that way from anybody in their process. That sort of trapdoor thing. At what
Mm-hmm.
point in your evolution as a creative person, as a songwriter, at what point did you kind of come upon that method? Was that something that has always been there? Was that something you've developed over time?
I think that as time goes on, it feels more like that. I think when I was younger, when you're young doing anything, I think what you're trying to do is learn the form. And it felt like, early on, like writing songs for me was like songs have a verse and then a chorus and then a bridge that does this, and you want to, it's like with anything, like it's hard to, I would imagine, I don't paint, but I would imagine that it's hard to start with, you have to learn how to paint the fundamentals first, would be my guess. And I feel like early on, it was a lot more about like practicing like the form and practicing like the rhyme and trying to get down like, oh, a lot of songs have like pop songs and country songs and classic rock, like they have a structure where it's like you drop a clue and then the third verse you come back to it and you kind of try to tie it all together. And I think as time has gone on, it's become a little more intuitive, and I think maybe a little less like structured. It's less it's a little more off the rails a little bit in a fun way.
Man, thanks for sharing all of that. I'm so you're making me think, especially with all of that, plus the conversation we had at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about the record, like I said, I've spent a lot of time with it, and I find something new each time, because there's a lot of, I'm always impressed when this happens, when there's a lot of stuff going on and it sounds smooth, right? Like I'm always amazed by so many different things happening. There's a couple of songs that have this kind of Pet Soundsy influence to them. There's a couple of songs that, like I said, remind me of some of those aughts bands. Vampire Weekend comes to mind with some of this stuff, right?
That was a huge one for me.
Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to that, because I'm curious, as I hear all these sounds, like what the records were that that you've kind of grown up on. What are sort of those seminal records for you, or those bands for you?
Yeah, I think early on, I mean, Vampire Weekend was a big band that really kind of helped it all. I don't know. I was, when I got into them, it was kind of around that third album coming out, and I was like, it was very like, they were the perfect songs to be coming out when I was that age, like high school age. Like, oh man, this is like really just, this feels like being this old, these kind of like heady, it was because I was like, these are like these really catchy, beautiful pop songs that are about like wrestling with like God and like wrestling with like big themes and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, I didn't know that was allowed all the time. But they were a big band for me. I was a huge like Animal Collective fan during that time. Like I was very, and that kind of was the thing that set me on the path of like, oh, the Beach Boys are more than just the band I liked when I was a kid. Cause I loved the Beach Boys when I was 7, 8 years old. I had like the greatest hits, but I was just like, oh, they're the fun beach band, And Animal Collective was the thing that made me go backwards and be like, oh, they were like really serious artists, and also kind of set me down the path of getting really into Pavement and a lot of like getting, kind of into like that era of stuff, like a lot of the 90s kind of indie rock type stuff,
Yeah, man, all that makes so much sense. That comment you made about the Beach Boys, I think, is just such a somewhat universal experience for so many of us, that like, I mean, me too. I had Endless Summer on cassette, and I remember how much I loved that cassette. And then much later really getting into Pet Sounds, especially right about the time that Smile was released. Just really going back and doing the deep dive. I actually got a chance to see Brian Wilson play Pet Sounds in 2016. Yeah, it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, I was super, it was funny, like growing up, being really into them and liking, the pop songs. And then it's funny because, then you get to a certain age and you get really into the Beatles, and it's like, oh, well, that's like ingrained in the story, is that they were artists, that is like that's the whole narrative. It's very clean. It's like they were the biggest pop band in the world, and then they were serious, and then they were done. And with the Beach Boys, you don't really learn that as much. And I was very into like the reissued, like the Smile Sessions kind of like
Yeah.
recomposited version of it. And I
Yeah.
remember listening to that and being like, I don't have like, I don't even know, I have to start over, like
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to start over.
Yeah, man. 100%. Okay. So I like that you framed that the narrative around the Beatles and the Beach Boys, for whatever reason, is different. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested. So let me ask you this question: is if you're looking at your musical journey so far, okay,
Mm-hmm.
um, and let's say someone was going to go ahead and make a documentary about your career, okay,
Sure.
what would be like 3 or 4 scenes that you think need to be included in that
Mm,
documentary to tell your story?
interesting. I would say scene one of the, maybe not in order, but one
Hmm.
of the scenes is definitely got to be me. I don't know, the first time I ever played a show in Athens. I had played a couple shows in Atlanta when I was first starting to like try and get out there and do stuff. But the first time I ever played in Athens, I played all these new songs that I hadn't like. It was the kind of thing where I invited a lot of people, and I wasn't sure if anyone was going to be there, and I played by myself. And I played, and it was very heavy. It was kind of like all these songs were very like heavy and raw and very fresh. And I remember like that night, several people that still play music with me coming up to me and being like, I know, like, we're friends. I didn't know you played music, and I'm in your band now. Like, I'm just
Oh,
letting you
wow.
know, like, like my friend Tom that produced this album and the last one, the last two, he and plays bass on a lot of our stuff in the recordings. Like he was there that night, and like our other friend Hampton P that has played in my band off and on for years. Like, I remember both of them walking up to me that night and being like, "So we're in your band. I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's just how it is."
Wow.
It's like,
Wow. Wow. What
it
a
was a
feeling.
yeah, no, definitely it was that would definitely be a big scene of that.
Okay. So we got
A big
that.
one.
Good. That is
Hmm.
huge. What else? If there's like a couple more scenes from your career so far, that is a big one. That's awesome.
Yeah. I guess the one I always think of is, especially in the early days, is like a big hinge point was there was this kind of wild moment where we were supposed to play like just a typical like Athens house show. We were gonna have a few bands play at our buddy's house, whatever, and the college paper in Athens, someone got a little too excited and wanted to write an article, basically a preview for the house show, and being like, "Come check out this sick thing." And it ended up being brought to the attention of the landlord of the house, and our buddy that was the host was like, "Yeah, my landlord said that's not happening." And it was the kind of thing where it was like, man, this is why you don't tell people about house shows. You don't put them in the paper. And
Yeah.
but it was funny because they basically last minute it was like, um we've got a lot of friends coming. We need to figure something out. And our friend Drew, who is our manager now, at the time he was working at the Georgia Theater in Athens, and he let us play on the roof,
Hmm.
and make it free and make it this whole big thing. And there was just like a line around the block to get up there. And I remember that was the first time that like all of our bandmates and our friends, we were like, dude, I didn't realize people liked me. Like, I thought this was just kind of like a funny thing that we did. And now, it was one of the first times where it was like, oh, this is like kind of something that people take seriously. And we probably ought to take it seriously, of like doing, at least my bandmates probably already took it seriously. I think that was one of the first times I realized it was something I needed to take seriously. But you know
Wow.
um
Okay. So
yeah.
I'm interested in that. So what I'm hearing you say is like, it's not as though you necessarily set out to make this sort of a full-time real thing. You just sort of backed up into it. Is that accurate?
Well, I think I always I think I always knew I wanted it to be a big thing or a big part of my life, but I had like I just had no plan.
Uh,
I had no sense of like seeing if anybody was invested in it. I had no way of gauging that. I had nothing beyond like, I just want to record some songs and put them out. And I guess that was one of the first times where it was like, oh, this is a thing that means something to like a community of people. And being in a band and playing in bands is like a thing you do in a scene and in a community and as a unit, and not just like on your island. So I guess that it was kind of a perspective widening type thing. It was always a big deal to me, but maybe not to that degree yet. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, no, that makes sense. I like the, acknowledgement that like you didn't necessarily have a plan. I think it's, I always like those questions. I'm interested in when people decided, first of all, when people acknowledge that they needed to make stuff, right? Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
as though all of us who make stuff, there is a need somewhere in us to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I didn't realize until probably at least my late 20s, probably into my 30s, that
Mm-hmm.
I was a creative person who needed to make stuff. And if I wasn't making stuff, I wasn't going to be my best self. And I now recognize that like I have to do it, because if I don't do it, then part of me is not fulfilled. It is not
Yeah.
satisfied. And I'm just not my best, right? If I'm
Yeah,
not doing
totally.
those things. But I think also I have only recently developed any sort of plan. Like in the last 6 years, I would say I started to develop some sort of plan. And I would say honestly, in the last 6 months, have I really been going for it? Have I really been
Yeah.
moving in that direction? And I think the lesson I've learned, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, especially reflecting on that time when you had that line around the block. I think what I've recognized in the last few months is the idea that I'm noticing with a plan that things are happening. Go
Totally.
figure,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. No, it's frustrating how it works out like that. How you think you think that, I mean, I was, I don't know. I always felt like, oh, I'll just waltz into whatever is going to happen to me. And then it kind of took a little bit of like having one or two, I think having like a little bit of fortunate stuff happen to you is sometimes a good and a bad thing, because you get upset when it doesn't keep happening that way. And then it turns into, oh, I actually have to like take real steps to replicate anything good happening going forward,
yeah. And then once you get to that next step, there are other steps. That's the other thing too,
Sure.
is like,
Yeah.
that's one of the things I've been reflecting on lately, is that like, we got to a certain level, whatever you want to say, with the Marinade, where it's like we have dedicated fans, who many of whom have been there since the beginning, and they're going to listen
Mm-hmm.
to every episode and they're going to
Yeah.
support us and all of that. And I love them and I'm grateful for them. But I also want to bring more people into the umbrella, because I feel like these conversations are important. And I want people to hear you talk about Hometown Vampire and Go Get the Record. And I want them to be inspired by something that you or I or both say. And so, more is better in that case. And I think what I've coming to the realization of is that like, you got to keep taking those steps, and you have to have kind of recalculate those plans too, recalibrate those plans.
Totally.
And you know what I mean? Cause like there's one thing to get the podcast started or get the record started. It's another thing to
Yeah.
finish it. It's another thing to then get it out there in the world. It's another thing to talk about it. And all of those
Sure.
steps, if you just sort of assume that what you did before is going to inform the next one, well, not necessarily, man,
Yeah. No, totally.
I'm interested in, so like I said, there's not like wasted time or space on this record. It, top to bottom is fantastic. Every song is great. There are 11 tracks on it. I'm interested in the process of putting that album together. Did you come in with a whole bunch of songs? Were these like clearly the 11 that you needed?
I think that the mindset I try to have when I go into like recording mode or putting the album together is like, I don't want to have it be the kind of thing where it's like, well, we probably had to have 8, 9, 10 songs, 11 songs, whatever. So I got a couple more laying around. I'll just kind of add them. And I mean, I've put out records that had like 8, 9. Like I'm very pro, like, if I don't feel like there's another one that needs to be there, we're done. And I think that for this one, it kind of came together pretty clearly of like, the songs were a little bit all over the map and sort of being written, not with a super, like, the last couple of records before that, I had really written them like really like in a batch. Like, okay, I remember where I was the day I started writing that first song, and I wrote until the last one, and we're done, you know?
Yeah.
This one, there was a lot more that I was writing, and a lot of songs this was one of the first times where I'd ever had songs that I mean, 2 of the songs were co-written, and it was kind of the first time that I'd ever been like bringing in someone to co-write the song, not because I was like, oh, it was less intentional. It was more of a, oh, this just isn't done, and I love the idea, but I really can't get it there, and I need someone to help me. And I had never really done it. I had co-written songs before, but it was always with the intent of like, I'm seeking out my friend who's good, and we're going to do this thing for this reason. Like, me and my buddy Zach had a song called Horse Girl come out a few years ago that was kind of like a joke song that we kind of wrote with the purpose of like, we're doing this. But all that to say that this one was kind of like slowly cohering as time went on. And then a big part of it was just that we had some recording time that we were able to get, and at the big studio where we did most of the record. And it was the kind of thing where Tommy reached out and was like, hey, we have like a week that's free. And we'd be able to do it, you know, kind of on the down low and on the cheap or whatever. And I figured you probably have some songs if you want to get working on anything else. And I was like, all right, you know, let's start. And this is a couple months out. And so I was able to kind of edit. And thankfully, in the way we've done, thankfully, kind of like blessing curse, we've done everything we've done in the past, really. And same with this album, like pretty strict budget, you know, kind of like I'm having to finance a lot of stuff myself, and I'm having to think through a lot of that alone. And I think when you have that also, that kind of forces you to edit, because it's like, well, I can't afford to make like a grand double, you know, like crazy concept album. I got to kind of keep it streamlined a little bit, you know?
That's really interesting. I've been talking a lot about sort of money and art, right? And like, you know, how I don't think most people realize how expensive it is to make a record, and then to pay a publicist and all of the thing, right? Studio time, all the stuff, musicians, artwork, and I mean, just on and on and on and on. And I don't think most folks realize that, especially with streaming and music just being out there for free.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important to kind of highlight just how much money plays into the decision-making process of this, right? I heard, so I'm interested in that moment when you couldn't get the song across the finish line and you asked for some help, and you brought in somebody. How comfortable are you asking for help in that kind of situation creatively?
I think I've gotten a lot better about it. I used to really not be good at doing that. I was almost a little militant about not doing that in the past. I think I was kind of like, well, everybody else can co-write, but I'm serious, I'm a real, you know, and not realizing how stupid of a mentality that is. But I think for me, for this one, it was like, it was especially helpful too, because we were the guy who it was my manager Drew, and one of my bandmates. He plays with us and played on the record, and Drew Beskin, I basically, we were making an album for him before, like while I was writing these songs. Like we were in the recording process for his record, and I was kind of still writing a lot of these songs. And so we were already friends before that, but we had gotten to know each other a lot better and gotten to understand each other's musical sensibilities a lot better. And the record that we made together really was like very, I think for all of us that were involved in a kind of like third eye open type experience of just like how much fun recording music can be and everything like that. And but so I was basically just kind of like, with both of these songs, it was the title track, Hometown Vampire, and then Nobody Ever Feels This Way, the last song. With both of those, I kind of brought something to him and was like, I have half or three quarters or however much of a song, and it feels like it needs something else. And I think that you might be the one that can crack it. They didn't happen at the same time, but with both of them, he just kind of took it and ran with it. And I was able to sort of, he's a big ideas guy. He's got, like, you ask him to help you write a song, and he's basically going to write a whole nother song almost, which is really exciting. And then I was able to kind of like condense it and edit it down a little bit from all the kind of the ideas he had fired off.
What was the name of that record? The Third Eye record?
Oh, this album that we made, his album is called Somewhere Sideways, Same as You.
Okay.
It's Drew's record. I played bass all over it. It was basically the exact same team of people that made Hometown Vampire. It was my brother playing drums and our buddy Tom playing a lot of lead guitar and producing stuff. And it was like we would do every song like one in a day. And Drew would basically finish writing the song the day before the session. Like he would literally book a day and be like, I'm going to have a song finished by that day. And then, we'll figure it out. And that really kind of helped me I don't know. It was a very fun, eye-opening type experience. And like I said, really kind of made me realize that Drew on the songwriting level, and also just allowing my brother Gideon and Tommy, our producer, to like allowing myself to trust them more, of like, I can just kind of give you the ball and I know that you're going to make it happen,
Very cool. Very cool. Can you talk a little bit about, I've read a couple of things where you've sort of described the idea of sort of local celebrity or small town kind of celebrity. Can you talk a little bit about that and that theme?
Yeah, I think that where I was kind of coming from, and like the Athens experience, it's so like, it's not unique, but it feels like it, it's like anywhere that has like a music scene has that thing of like, you get a little too big for the environment you're in. And Athens especially has a really funny aura where sometimes there's like this double-edged sword of it, it's a place that's a little cheaper to live than a lot of other places, and it can often create this like a lot of just no boundaries, really exciting art, really exciting music. But the kind of flip side of that is that there's not always the most ambition. And I think that a lot of our friends were sort of struggling with this idea that like, feels like every time you try to get up out of the mud, people are, just going to like make fun of you, and people are going to criticize you. And it was very, I think, on everybody's mind. I have a friend from Athens that played on this record and has played in my band for a little while. This guy named Cannon Rogers. He's got this song that he put out called Classic City Celebrity, because Athens is called the Classic City. And it was so weird because he showed it to me and I was like, dude, this is so much of what I've been thinking about, of like this idea of like, if you what's the middle ground of like, I'm trying to do well and I'm trying to be taken seriously, but I don't want to be self-serious, and I don't want to be like a scumbag who thinks that the fact that people in my town know who I am means anything more than what it really does. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you have a hard time with that at all? Are you able to balance that well?
I think that, I mean, I don't think that, I think that I think for some time at the beginning of playing music, I was always very aware of like, how are people perceiving me? How are people seeing me? And then I at this point, I have no real interest, and I have no knowledge. People, I'm kind of like, I have no idea, because I'll meet people in Athens who are like, I've seen you play a gazillion times. I know every word, and I know what restaurant you like to eat at. And then I have friends, or I'll have people that I'm well acquainted with that are like, oh, you play music? And I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry. It's fine. Like, it does not, it matters, but it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not, it's not anything that I feel particularly worried about knowing or caring much about, of like how people view anything that I do, especially if they're like my neighbors. Like, I'm just like, if they like it, that's great. And if they don't, then that's fine. You know?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I mean, my partner in life does not listen to my podcast at all. And
Yeah.
like that's fine. You know,
Yeah,
like,
no.
I mean, it's not for her, and that's
Yeah.
okay. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want her to listen just to humor me or whatever. It
No,
doesn't-
totally. I get that. I mean, I think it's always funny. It's important, I think, to have people in your life who are like, I'm here for you, and I'm not gonna lie to you about stuff, and I'm not, you know, like my girlfriend is very good at being like, I love your music, I care about it, but you know, when we met, I was not a music, like, we've been friends for a long time, and it was like, the thing we always laugh about is like, when she met me, I was not somebody that played in a band. She had no idea about any of that, and it's like, you don't ever want to be with someone where it feels like it's based on anything you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, that would be terrible.
Absolutely.
That would be awful.
Yes, it would. Yes, I 100% agree with you. That is well said. Man, this has been a pleasure. We usually end on what you're getting down on. So that's the art that has you inspired at the moment. Could be music you're listening to, or a film you've watched, or painting, or whatever.
Oh man. It's
Book you're reading.
I've been reading this. Well, I've actually been reading this book recently. It's called The Girls, or no, not The Girls, The Guest, by Emma Cline. She had another book called The Girls, but The Guest, it's like this story of this woman that kind of is just like a 23-year-old train wreck, like burning bridges left and right with all her friends and anybody she like dates or anything like that. And there was this line in it that I read the other day. We were headed up to New York to play a show, and it was funny. It kind of hit me a little too close to home, because it was this line about like seeing a bunch of young people on the train at the beach with, you know, they're going to spend the weekend in a nice condo, and the whole idea was like, they want to seem wealthy, and they, you know, they want to live inside of a world that they'll never be part of, you know, just for a week or something like that. And I was like on my way to New York to blow a bunch of money on these nice restaurants that we ate at, and I was like, I guess that's kind of me right now, you know. a little too straight up, but
yeah.
You know,
I love that. I love that when art calls you out on your own bullshit. That's great.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
man, that's great. Well, dude, this is, again, I'm really grateful for your time and energy. Hometown Vampire, folks listening, go get the record, go listen to it. Physical copies available on your website. Okay.
Yeah. On the website, or on the label's website, Strolling Bones Records. Either
Awesome. Yeah. Go get a physical copy, everybody. Trust me. It's great. Give it a spin. Listen to it. Man, I wish you all the best. And I'm really, really, like I said, very grateful for this record, and very grateful for your time.
Dude, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Have a great night.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, you too.
All right, thank you.
All right, see ya.
See ya. Elijah Johnston, y'all. Thank you so much, Elijah. Thank all of you for listening. ElijahJohnston.net for all things Elijah Johnston. Go get a physical copy of Hometown Vampire, y'all. The song you're hearing in this episode is Drewby Got a Haircut from that wonderful record. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade. I just published a review of episode 149, guest Terry Klein's excellent new record over there, and am committed to writing quite a bit more in the coming weeks and months and years. We'll have our year recap coming up. I always like to do a couple of pieces to kind of wrap up the year, and I'm also planning on reviewing more shows and records as I used to do, what feels like a long time ago, but I'm really committed to spending more time writing, and so look for that coming up soon. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, Spoutable, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon. We're on all the things, y'all, other than Facebook. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app. Tell a friend about the show. These are all free ways to support The Marinade. Go do that now while you're listening, please. It makes a big difference for us and costs so little of your time and energy. If you really like what we're doing and can swing it, please consider joining our Patreon community, where for just a few bucks a month, you can gain access to Patreon exclusive content like our show Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that shape my creative life and provide a window into the process of making The Marinade. I want to shout out our newest patron, Connor Hickey. Connor has been just so supportive of the show and of my work for so long, and me of his as well. He's a wonderful songwriter. You've heard me talk about him before, and I'm just so grateful that he's chipping in over there and being a part of our little community. We have fun over there. We get to turn each other on to different music, and we have conversations that maybe would get lost on a larger platform, but we have kind of a close-knit community over there, and I feel like everybody's voice gets heard, which is really great. And you can try a free trial of it if you want. If you want, you can try it, see if you like it. No pressure. Try it for 7 days. Set a reminder on your phone in case you want to cancel, and keep going if you dig it. It's just $2 a month, y'all. You can chip in more if you're able, but you'll get everything for $2 a month. If you want to support the show financially, but you don't want to commit to a monthly subscription, I totally get that. You can Venmo or PayPal us. It's just at The Marinade. All the money goes right back into the making of the show. We're going to be covering Orange Blossom Review. We want to get back to Swanee in the spring. There's all these things that are coming up that our Patreon patrons make possible. So thank you so much. But hey, above all, y'all, we are just thankful that you listen and spread the word about The Marinade. Until the next time, go out and create something. Cheers.